What is going on, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all having an amazing day. In this one, I've got 4 phenomenal revenge stories for you, starting off pretty seriously, to be honest. If you're a fan of relationship drama and cheaters getting what they deserved, then this story is for you. Sit back, relax, make sure you are subscribed to my channel for more stories like this in the future. Let's go. Cheat on your wife with mine, I will burn your life to the ground. Way back in the early 2000s, I began to suspect that my wife was up to something. Our 2 kids were about 4 and 6. Still young, but not so young they couldn't tell you something about what had happened in their day. They started talking a lot about staying with my wife's parents during the day, which wasn't really that strange in and of itself. But since they lived about 90 minutes away, doing so 2 or 3 times a week seemed a bit much. That was basically every day she wasn't working at her part-time job. When I asked her about it, she denied it, but she was never a good liar. So I started tracking the mileage on her car, and sure enough, she was driving an extra 400 or so miles per week. I knew something was going on. Then, one day I sat down at the computer and she had left a sticky note with her AOL password written on it next to the keyboard. I couldn't resist, and I logged in to read her emails, and I saw a few email exchanges between her and her college BFF where they discussed how my wife was regularly effing one of her ex-boyfriends from school. No mention of details about him other than my wife also talking trash about his wife, making fun of how she'd gotten fat after having kids. Anyway, I printed out these email exchanges and I stashed them. I still needed to know the details, so I called a friend who was a cop, and he suggested I call a guy he knew that had left the force to become a PI. Ron was great. I paid his retainer and gave him the emails and what little I knew about my wife's activities, and he figured out exactly what she was doing. His report detailed with photos and times, dates, and locations, all about how she would take the kids to her parents, then go and meet this guy for lunch, then they'd go to a dumpy motel for a few hours, after which she'd pick up the kids and return home. At this point, I hired a divorce lawyer. My parents cheated on each other, and the fallout absolutely effed mine and my siblings' childhood. It was something that was totally unacceptable. I also asked Ron to find out what he could about this guy. Ron absolutely came through. I learned his name, let's call him Bob, that he was married and had 3 kids. I also found out that he worked as a VP of sales for his father-in-law's business. At this point, I had my lawyer draw up the divorce papers. I also asked Ron for a couple more copies of his report and one more thing that I wanted him to do for me. On the same day I had my wife served with the divorce papers at her work, I had Ron meet with this guy's wife and show her everything he'd found out. She seemed nice, and I figured that she deserved to know what her dear hubby was up to. What she did with that information, well, that's up to her. While the information about my wife's infidelity didn't really matter in my divorce proceedings, Bob's wife did a real number on him. According to the publicly available court documents from the divorce and other related proceedings, she cleaned out their joint account, took the kids, and left. As soon as her dad found out what he'd done, Bob was fired, and since her parents actually owned the house where Bob and his wife lived, he also got evicted. Their divorce was ugly. Lots of fighting, in and evidently out of court. I guess Bob went to the house and started arguing with his wife, and it escalated to the point that her brother stepped in and Bob got his nose broken. There were restraining orders, a few more incidents with police reports, criminal charges, jail time, and so on. I can't find Bob on the internet anywhere these days. Last I heard, he'd left the state and his ex-wife did okay. She went to work at her dad's company and took over after he retired. As for me, my ex and I get along well enough. I didn't engage with her on anything that wasn't related to the kids, and now that they're both adults, I don't talk to her at all anymore. I don't hate her or anything, but I only care in the context that she is my kids' mum and is important to them. Nothing beyond that. Well, good. She is getting what they deserve. It's a phenomenal start to this episode. Simple story, but it's great that there was justice served to the people who deserved it. I've got to say, OP, seriously, fair play. I say this quite a lot when I comment on these stories, but I don't know how people just keep so cool in these situations, and they use logic, and I feel like I'd be driven by such anger and hatred and just shame of what had happened to me and the fact that my partner had cheated on me. But yeah, you just went through pretty methodically, step by step, and checked off all the boxes and got it done. In the process, destroying Bob's life. Phenomenal scenes, and again, it's exactly what he deserved. Now for our next story of revenge. My landlord thought he could pull one over on me. but ended up learning the meaning of you should have read the fine print before you signed it. For some context, I live in Germany, which has extremely strong tenants' rights. I've been living in my apartment for about 8 years now. About 1 year after I first moved in, I got a letter from the company that owns my apartment building. In short, it said this: Dear OP, we are cancelling your existing rental contract. If you wish to continue renting this apartment, please sign this new contract with higher rent or move out within 30 days. This scared the heck out of me. I was living in a city where the rent prices were skyrocketing and I'd only just managed to find a long-term apartment that I could afford. As soon as I began looking at my options, it became clear that I was either going to have to fight what was essentially an eviction or move back to the US and start building my life again just after I'd finally found some stability. After I asked around a bit, somebody tipped me off to something called amithejerk. I know I'm not pronouncing that right, but I'll go with it one more time. amithejerk, something like that, which is essentially a non-profit group that advocates for tenants' rights and gives its members the opportunity to get legal advice regarding their rights as tenants. I looked up one near me and booked it over to their office. I explained my situation, I filled out some paperwork, and I went to speak with the group's lawyer. I showed her the letter and my current contract, and she looked over it for a few minutes without saying a word. After what felt like an eternity, she looked at me and said in her most diplomatic German legalese, "You have nothing to worry about. This letter is BS." Now, admittedly, yeah, that's paraphrased, but that's what it boiled down to. She then turned to a page of the contract and pointed out a single line in it. No changes may be made to this contract unless both parties consent to the proposed changes. In other words, as long as I refuse to sign, they can't do anything to me. The group's lawyer then sent a letter on my behalf to the company. I received a copy of it for my records, and essentially it told the company that they would find themselves in some major trouble with the government if they continued to pursue the matter further. About a month went by, and I heard nothing more. Then, one day, a letter from the company arrived. The company basically admitted defeat and tried to cover its tail by saying that the letter was sent in error by, quote, an employee who is no longer with the company. Okay, super believable. For the next 7 years, it became an annual ritual. Company sends ominous letter telling me I'm getting kicked out. I then forward the letter to the amithejerk, and the amithejerk's lawyer sends them a letter telling them to stick the letter where the sun don't shine. And then, after attempt number 8, the lawyer sent them another letter telling them to cut the trash and stop sending these letters every year. I haven't heard from them since. It's just so obvious, isn't it, that they're doing this to all their tenants, trying to force them out, trying to scare them. In reality, they know that legally this is never gonna work unless the tenant who they're trying to force out and terrify signs, which I imagine sadly a lot of them do, not knowing what OP knows. But yeah, it's just very sad. I think the thing to do now, though, is to make sure that all your neighbors know about this. As I said, it's obvious that this company and probably other companies in the country as well and across the world are just preying on susceptible and vulnerable people who know no better. And I wouldn't know any better as well. I mean, if I got something like this and I didn't, if I was new to the country especially, I would have no idea. So I think that the thing now is just awareness, making sure that other people don't get ripped off like you almost did. I mean, you say you asked around a bit and someone tipped you off to something called the amithejerk. I mean, thank God that exists as well, by the way, because if it's non-profit and doesn't need, like, I don't know if you said it was for free or not, but anyway, it's non-profit, right? Maybe it's a charitable sort of thing, but it's doing the God's work, is what I'm saying. And the more people that know about it, the better. Because, I mean, landlords and companies that own buildings and then rent them out get a bad rep anyway. This is despicable. No proof? Oh, bless your heart, boss. I wouldn't be surprised if some of you are going to think this is fake, but I feel like other disabled people will find this a little satisfying, especially with how human resources officers across the board have sunk to new levels of gaslighting. I have a genetic condition that gives me a variety of weird disorders, including a severe walnut allergy and cancer during my late teens. Since I'm in my 20s, many people assume that I'm not as disabled as I actually am, but 90% of the time I just shrug it off. I've experienced a lot of subtle disability discrimination at work, but I've never been at a company where they're comfortable flat out saying, we don't hire disabled people. Like, personally, I understand the logic of accidentally discriminating against me because you worried your company could give me an allergic reaction, but every disabled person is unqualified? That eventually led me to this conversation. Head of HR and owner of major company saying, I understand you had a misunderstanding with your manager yesterday. I wanted to apologize for any mix-up. No, there was no misunderstanding, I replied. My manager denied me a reasonable accommodation because you don't do them and said your company doesn't hire anyone with a gap in their resume due to disability or illness. Personally, I don't see how chemotherapy I had years ago affects my qualifications for working as a store cashier. The owner replied, those are serious accusations, which we will certainly look into. Unfortunately, none of our employee calls are recorded, so there's nothing I can really do about a he said, she said situation. I cut him off. Oh, it's not. You're welcome to treat it as a he said, she said situation if that's your decision. However, I do have the conversation captured for my own records. I'm sorry. Let me understand. You recorded your conversations with our employees? Well, this state is single party consent. I wish I could have seen his face when I clicked play on my computer, and he heard my manager say that the company was going to throw out my resume only because I needed chemotherapy a while ago, since the owner was, quote, particular. The silence on the owner's end when he realized that his trashy policies were caught on a hot mic was priceless. I would add more details to show just how bad the situation got before and after reaching out to HR, but to be honest, the EEOC is about to traumatize them harder than I ever could. But this one is just insane. I mean, the previous two stories were pretty bad. This one just saying, nah, you had chemo, and because there's a gap in your resume, we can't hire you, is actually unbelievably, like, I don't even know the word to use. I suppose it's ableist, but it's also just like so disgustingly sad. It's just people that have a heart wouldn't include this in their contracts. And also, like, why does it even matter? Is it not? I would argue it's probably a positive thing that someone has managed to go through chemotherapy, come out the other side, and still is doing, successful enough in life to come to you and be in a good spot to work for your company. Isn't that just an amazing thing? Rather than, oh, actually, no, you have a history of cancer, therefore there's a chance you might get it again, so we're not going to employ you. What's the logic there? I have no idea. Now for our final story of this one. I think I broke my brother-in-law. I made this Reddit account months ago, and today I'm deciding to use it instead of having this post linked to my main. I still feel all kinds of icky about it, and I feel I'd be identifiable if people I know see it. Fair warning, I hate the FR. So here goes. My sister has been married to her husband for many, many years. Her daughter, his step, is severely disabled, physically and mentally, and needs 24/7 care. They part built a house to suit her needs. It needed much work and extending, so it's very much their forever house because it had to be. However, the house costs a lot of money, and neither my sister nor my brother-in-law can afford it on their own, which is why my sister hasn't just upped and left him. She'd have nowhere suitable to move my niece to without a lot of work and money, which she doesn't now have. And my niece's comfort is everything to her. My sister works full-time and provides care when she's not working, so as you can imagine, she's got a lot on her plate. A good few years ago, back before Brexit, which is when the UK voted to remove us from the European Union, don't remind me, my brother-in-law would bang on and on and on about immigrants taking our jobs and all sorts of other racist stuff. Funnily enough, he only brought out those little gems when I was over there, and that was because I am staunchly anti-racism. As an example, I'm a small woman and I'd be fronting up to big men in the local pub and making them back down by sheer force of will and the judicious pointing of a wine glass. My brother-in-law knew this, so he thought it would be funny to try and push my buttons whenever I was over at their house. At the worst of it, I had to be over there because of illnesses, both my sister and niece, and I couldn't just walk out, so I just gave him the stonewall face I reserved for utter idiots. He'd be grinning at me and getting a blank expression back, and he didn't like that, so he'd stomp off whining about how everyone's so sensitive and can't take a joke. The more I had to be over there, the more I got to hear about their plans for retiring abroad. A nice little something, somewhere in sunny Spain, and they'd have long conversations, waxing lyrical and dreaming about this. And then, brother-in-law dropped a bombshell that really upset my sister. He doesn't have a private pension to pull from when he retires, only the state pension. Oh no, I say. Does that mean you'll have to get a job over there? My brother-in-law replied, yeah, I will. So let me get this straight. You'll be an immigrant taking someone's job then, right? His face was a picture. I'm not even kidding. His eyes went completely blank and his face just dropped and went grey. He stood up and walked out into the back garden, and he never spoke another word to me for the rest of the month I was there. Sadly, I can't say it shut him up for good, but it did stop him from talking about immigrants in my presence. Okay, and this guy is just an absolute loser. You're going over to take care of ill people, and he's trying to make racist jokes because he knows you're anti-racist. That's good, isn't it? That's just the sort of person you want to be hanging around. I think the less I say about that guy, the better. But wow, what a way to end it. Let me know in the comments down below. Do you know anyone like this person? I personally don't, and I'm very thankful for that. But let me know if there's someone in your life that is like OP's brother-in-law. That is going to do it for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll catch you on the next one. I cannot believe people like that exist.